who should I invite to be Inspired Phuketian? And I had different people telling me Darren. Grant told me Darren, Jason told me Darren, a few other people told me Darren. And I was like, okay, I must talk to Darren. I have to find out who this guy is. And when I met him, he was very courageous. He just get really open and just tell me like, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I accept it, I'm doing this now. Usually guys don't tell you that stuff. Men don't tell you what they failed at before. They don't tell you they're not good at something. Nobody wants to tell you that, but he told me that. Besides my husband, no other men that I could remember actually come and tell me, yeah, I'm not good at this, I'm bad at this, blah, blah, blah. Nobody say that to me. And now he encouraged me to tell you my fears. I know I complain and I do this and I write stuff on Facebook, but for me to tell you about my fears in person is different. This is fear. But fear encourages me to do what I'm doing now. And fear encouraged Darren to do what he's doing now. And he influenced a lot of people. And I think he is a great, inspiring person. He deserves to be an Inspired Phuketian. And I would like to ask you all to please welcome Ironman, media commentator, and a hero of his own story, Darren Tremaine.
Come here. That was awesome. Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you. I think we should give Abel one more round of applause. It takes an enormous amount of courage, and it takes an enormous amount of strength to expose that amount of vulnerability. I tip my hat to you. Bravo, bravo. That is what's inspiring, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, the first thing that I want to start with is thank you for coming out this evening. I really, really appreciate it. I have an enormous amount of gratitude for a lot of the familiar faces that I see in the audience tonight. Now is not the time for apprehension or timidness. We, and it's a collective we, must start entering a room, standing in our presence, bringing with us humility, honesty, compassion, and courage. Take a look outside at the reflection. Tell me what you see. Reflections are an indicator of what's going on inside of us. We all have a story that keeps us disconnected from ourselves. We've been searching and searching for that treasure outside of ourselves, thinking that we will find this proverbial pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. What we fail to realize is that we are the pot of gold and we are the rainbow. The only permission you need is your own. To stop telling yourselves these narratives of I am blank enough. Listen very, very closely. You might recognize that voice filling in the blanks. I'm a Canadian by birth. I grew up in the Great White North. I come from a city called Winnipeg.
Winterpeg.
Oh my word. There we go. I lived in a dodgy neighborhood. It was the type of neighborhood where a few times throughout the week I'd have to get up, open my apartment, go downstairs, knock on the door. Excuse me, in my polite Canadian accent. Excuse me, would you mind turning down the music, please? It's not like we were partying or something, man. I'd walk upstairs, I'd feel a little tap on my shoulder. Isn't karma a little late? Pardon me, a little early to be tapping on our shoulder at 32? How did I become that old man who lived upstairs? Growing up in Winnipeg, it was a badge of honor for me to ride my bike. Snow, sleet, spring, summer. But even in Winnipeg, when it gets down to minus 30, that badge of honor isn't the only thing that'll freeze. I'm going to a little store in my neighborhood. So I zip up, I leave my bike. I run in. I've got my basket in this hand. Frantically, I'm throwing in the groceries into my basket because I've left my bike outside. Okay? So I run up, and there's a line up in the queue. I'm like, come on, man, hurry up, hurry up. And I'm watching this cashier. That son of a bitch is taking his time. I know he's doing it on purpose to try to ruffle my feathers. I get up to the line and I say, mate, hurry up, hurry up. I've got my bike locked up outside. He looked at me and said, my friend, maybe you've owned it long enough. That's the same thing with these stories we tell ourselves. Maybe we've owned it long enough. We all love a great story. The story of a hero, adversity, and our hero triumphing over adversity. Passion and conviction are a force multiplier. It sparks hope that one day you could be courageous. It sparks hope that one day you can be heroic. Hope is the catalyst for one step after another on that 42.2 kilometer stumble at times. Hope and inspiration are what molds us together. Without hope, we would simply shrug our shoulders and say, it's good enough. Tonight we're talking about the hero story. And unfortunately, good enough is not good enough. We all are looking for that little glimmer that will give us that spark for us to take action. Unfortunately, the biggest thing that's going to get in our way is not outside these doors. The biggest thing that's going to get in our way is ourselves. Let me ask you a question. At the end of every fairy tale, how does the story end? What was that?
Happily ever after.
They lived happily ever after. And I think a lot of us have bought into this fairy tale of happy ever after. This fairy tale validates our need for certainty and control in our life. This fairy tale fits in very, very nicely with a contorted conception of right and wrong, good and bad, and is a perfect formula for following all the breadcrumbs along the trail to guarantee success. The perfect next move, the arithmetic for justice and fairness. Yet, how many of us have screamed, this shouldn't be happening to me? The fairy tale, as I like to call it, happy ever after, is nothing but an illusion. This fairy tale will tell us that what we are seeing might not always be the truth, but yet we believe it to be the truth. Oh. Might have to get a little louder now with that rain. That's great. Is that okay? Everybody hear me? You guys can hear me back there, Sue? Excellent. What do you think is the biggest thing that stops most people from taking action? It has nothing to do with lack of ambition. It has nothing to do with lack of willpower. It has nothing to do with that magic trump card purpose. The biggest thing that stops most people from taking action is fear. Once again, the biggest thing that stops most people from taking action is fear. Tonight, we are talking about the hero's story. We're not talking about action. Anybody can take action. I think a lot of us are really good at taking a lot of action and convincing ourselves that being busy is our purpose. I'm taking a run right now. Look at me, I'm getting some action. I'm busy, busy, busy. Action, 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 action. No, the strength I'm talking about, the action that I'm talking about, requires that we stand in our presence with our honesty, with our humility, with our compassion, and with our courage. This one's going to take a leap of faith, and I'm going for it. Where we look another person in the eyes and we tell her, I love you. She has terminal brain cancer, and you look at her in the eyes. This is the strength I'm talking about. And you say, Mom, I love you. I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't let you get closer to me. It was my insecurities, Mom. It was my inadequacies. It had absolutely nothing to do with you. It was those protective walls I built around my heart to save me from me. That's the kind of action I'm talking about. The biggest thing that will stand in our way is not out that door. The biggest thing that's going to stand in our way is ourselves, is our thinking. Once again, let's look at the reflections. What do you see? Now, there might be a few of you saying to yourself, whoa, that's not me. Shoot, I'm even saying it to myself. That's not me as well. And if you think I'm full of shit, let's take a little test, okay? Don't worry, you're not going to be graded on it. I want you to take a look at my picture. I'll come around, and I want you to see how many triangles do you see? Okay, I'll come around a couple of times. Don't say it out loud. How many triangles do you see? Count them really quickly. How many triangles do you see? How many triangles? How many triangles? How many triangles? I'll come to the back. I know, Jim, your eyesight isn't as good as it used to be. How many triangles do you see? How many triangles do you see, guys? How many triangles? Okay, how many triangles? Count them quickly. How many triangles? How many triangles? How many triangles? Oh, don't say it out loud, okay? How many triangles do you see? How many triangles? How many triangles? How many triangles do you see? Okay, did anybody need to see it again one more time? Okay. Any? Don't say it out loud. How many triangles did you see? Okay. Put up your hand if you saw more than 5 triangles. Wow. Okay, keep your hand up if you saw more than 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Did anybody see 12? Did anybody see 13 triangles?
8.
How many? 8. Okay. Take a look one more time. How many triangles did you see? There's no triangles here. Okay? This is an illusion. There's no triangles there. It's an illusion. Now, you want to talk about seeing fears? How many times in our life have we seen these triangles telling us not to take that massive leap of faith? How many times have you seen a triangle when there's actually no triangle there? And that's a really interesting thing about us humans, is that whether real or imagined, we still are going to have that same physiological response to whether it's a real triangle or whether it's an imaginary triangle. Now, I grew up in a time of aliens that eat Reese's Pieces. In a galaxy far, far away, there was Death Stars. And there was a little fish that swam in the sea. Doo-doo, doo-doo. There was this fish that swam in the sea. Now remember, I live right in the middle of Canada, and there's no oceans around for 3 provinces. Yet, my mind was convinced that when I would jump into that water, there was a shark in the water. What the hell just brushed against my leg? Was that a dorsal fin? The sharks that live in my mind know exactly how far I've swum out from the boat dock. They know when I go pee in the lake. and they know how tired my arms are. Now, I know some of you might be saying, well, that's a little childish, isn't it? And I'll agree with you. But for a lot of us, even these fears, real or imagined, they sure do feel real. They sure do feel real. I even carried this fear with me of these sharks into my first Ironman race. So never mind, I've got the enormity of the day in front of me, okay? And here I am, I'm looking out at the swim start, I'm looking out at those pylons, and I'm going, shit, was that a dorsal fin I just saw out there? I convinced myself I saw a dorsal fin. Quickly, I calmed myself down by reminding myself this. Mate, you don't have to outswim a shark, you just got to outswim the other swimmer. So I've talked a lot about how the body responds to fear, and this is incredible. This is really incredible that we're going to have the same physiological reaction to a fear, real or imagined. Now, my background, my education background is I have a degree in exercise physiology. And I can remember that moment. You know when you get those light bulb moments like, aha, a spark plug went off. And I was reading a paper written by Tim Noakes. Does anybody know Tim Noakes? Paulo, do you know Tim Noakes? No? Okay, South African exercise physiologist. Okay, so Tim Noakes is his name. He's from South Africa, and he's written this paper. And the title of the paper is Fatigue is a Brain-Derived Emotion. And now up until this point, you know, the way we are taught how the body responds to fatigue is we're not able to keep up with the production of ATP. Correct? Correct. So Noakes comes along and asks this question. So if we've depleted all our muscle glycogen, we've hit that wall. We've hit that wall. You've been there. You've hit that wall. Okay, you've been there. I know Dave's hit that wall. Why is it 200 meters from the finish line we can sprint? We've hit the wall. We're not supposed to be able to go any further, but yet all of a sudden we're able to summon up this another round of power, this second wind, so to speak. Tim Noakes also wrote a very, very, very interesting book for all you sports geeks out there as well, sports science geeks. It's called The Lore of Running. So here he is. He's positioned himself as an expert in the field of exercise physiology. He's an expert, okay? His book is this thick, all right? An expert. This was written maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, The Lore of Running. In the last 4 years, he has had the courage, the strength, and the conviction to say, go to my book, Lore of Running, where it comes to this chapter on carbo loading, rip it out, throw it away. That's the kind of strength I'm talking about. That kind of courage, that kind of honesty, that kind of humility. You know, to me, that is very, very heroic and requires an enormous, enormous amount of courage. I think a lot of us think that extraordinary, heroic moment is something that's out there, that's only limited to the halls of academia, that's only limited to these heroes. What we need to remember that these extraordinary, heroic moments are around us every day in the ordinary. Are around us every day in the ordinary. About a month ago, I was with a young man in the gym, And I said, okay, mate, we're going to get ready. Let's start our session for the day. I said, you know what you got to do first, though? You've got to tie up your shoes. Okay, we're going to have a big session. You got to tie up your shoes. He was like, you know what, Darren? I'm okay. I don't need to tie up my shoes. It's okay. There was about a 10-second pause. This kid looked up at me, 17-year-old, and with a massive amount of courage, looked at me and said, Darren, I don't know how to tie my shoes. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You are 17 and you have this amount of strength and courage? You are the kind of person I want to surround myself with. I surround myself with people who have the courage to say, I don't know. I don't know. Please help me. What we have to remember about these heroes and these extraordinary heroic moments that we see is what we're seeing is we're really getting a glimpse. We're getting a reflection of what's in them is a reflection of what's in us. So my question to you is, how do you tie your shoes? It starts with the basics. How do you tie your shoes? Do you have the courage, the humility, the compassion to sit there and say, I don't know how to tie my shoes? It comes down to fundamentals. Fundamentals, fundamentals. During the 70s, there was a basketball coach who coached at UCLA, John Wooden. He won 10 national championships in 12 years. That's Division I college basketball, United States. He won 10 championships in 12 years. He had a 7-row stint, a dynasty, where each year his team were the national champions. Do you know what he did the first 2 weeks of every year with his team? Do you know what they practiced for 2 weeks at the start of the year? Putting on their socks. Putting on their socks. How are you putting on your socks? Start with the basics. How are you putting on your shoes? Start with the basics. Start with the basics. How are you moving your body? Are you honoring yourself with standing tall? Or are you slouching forward and closing yourself off from life? I have a lot of my clients here tonight, and they'll tell you one of the first things that we work on, basics, basics, basics. How tall is your spine? Are you walking around with your chest up and your chin back? Leading with your heart, because it starts with our spine. I encourage people to look at their posture, and I want to ask you this question. Are you the predator or are you the prey? How does a predator walk through the jungle? How does a tiger walk through the jungle? Chest up, chin back. Automatically, we're opening ourselves up to life. We're taking all this compression force off the spine. How does a predator sit in its chair? Compression, head forward. It starts with the basics. It starts with the fundamentals. You start with the basics and the fundamentals, and you start building on that. If you would have told me 20 years ago that starting with the basics would take me to 5 Ironman races, that would take me of a lap, running a lap around Phuket Island, I would have said, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. All it takes is one step after the other of starting with the basics. One little itty-bitty step. Paulo, did you play with dominoes when you were a kid?
I was.
Okay. We set up some dominoes, right? Do you remember the sound a domino would make when you'd knock them over?
Yes.
What sound would it make? How?
Tack.
Tack, tack, tack. Okay. Do you know the physics involved in a domino? So a domino can knock over another domino 1.5 times its size. So the physics involved in a domino can knock over another domino 1.5 times its size. So we're going to start here, Paulo. We're going to start here. We'll give it a minute. We're going to start with a little itty bitty domino. The fundamentals, the basics. And we'll start with one here, and it'll just be 5 millimeters. Okay, we're going to start with one here, and we're going to extend it 29 times over there. Okay, so 1.5 times its size, 29 times. Okay, do you want to give it a little flick, a little nudge, a 5 millimeter little push? A 5 millimeter little push. That's all it takes sometimes, is just a 5 millimeter little flick. Okay, make your noise. Make the noise. What sound does it make? And knocks it over. So we started, how big was this one? 5 millimeters. Extended 29 times. How big's that last one? It's the size of the Empire State Building. 1 5 millimeter flick, 1 5 millimeter shove. Start with the basics, 5 millimeters, flick. You're going to be amazed with the possibilities. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Finishing an Ironman takes an enormous amount of willpower, determination, and laser sharp focus. That same determination, willpower, and laser sharp focus is also required at 9 a.m. when everybody's out walking to work and you're looking for your next score, when you're looking for your next hit. Here comes your another head fake. We're going to smash down one of those triangles. I'm also an addict and I'm an alcoholic. I've been clean and sober since 2001. Over 16 years, been living this path of recovery. Now, I tell this to most people, and you know what their first response is when I tell this to most people? They look at me and they say, "You don't look like an addict." You don't look like an addict. Who, me? Question, what does an addict look like? I'd really like to know, what does an addict look like? So it's been 16 years. You know, I've been clean and sober. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of flick down some of those triangles we create about ourselves. Triangle number 1. Okay, triangle number 1. Drugs work. Okay? Drugs work. I like drugs, and that's what my problem is. I like the effect it gives me, but I've got something inside of me that once I start, I can't stop. Once I start putting something inside my body that tells me to go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, I can't stop. When I first came to grips with my addiction and my alcoholism, I hated the fact I was an alcoholic. I hated the fact I was a drug addict. This shouldn't be happening to me. I followed all those steps along the trail. I had a normal childhood. I had a normal life into my mid-20s. And then normal soon took on a different meaning. Normal for any addict or alcoholic is having a conversation with the bottle of booze saying, "You're not going to get me tonight." Normal for any addict or alcoholic is crawling around on your hands and knees looking for a forgotten sliver of redemption in the insanity of your addiction to cocaine. Cocaine was not my problem. Cocaine was a solution to my problem. My problem is me. A lot of people ask me, what was the defining moment in your life where you kind of made that switch and became an addict or an alcoholic? I'll be very honest with you. I didn't study Addict 101 while I was growing up. It wasn't my life's ambition to be crawling around on my hands and knees, begging, manipulating people, stealing, doing anything I had to do to get my next fix. That wasn't my life goal. My addiction and my alcoholism completely forced me to change how I was living my life. A lot of people kind of look at me a little puzzled when I tell them the greatest thing that ever happened to me was my addiction to cocaine. That's the greatest gift I've been ever given. Because it forced me to start asking myself a very, very empowering question. Instead of the reactive, why is this happening to me? I started asking myself, why is this happening for me? We've all got a story. We've all got scars. But guess what? Our scars can be our greatest strength. Our scars allow us to relate to the humanity in one another. Our scars allow us to accept one another just as they are, not having to change them, fix them, or manipulate them. I should probably tell you one more thing, just so we clear up any miscommunication. This is the biggest myth out there, okay? A lot of us think people who are drug addicts and alcoholics don't have any willpower. It's actually the quite opposite. We have an incredible amount of willpower. We have an incredible amount of willpower. And we can use that same willpower that was once the problem can now be the solution. And that's the same thing with being courageous, being heroic, and standing in your own presence. Is that you are the solution, but at the same time, you're also the problem. Marianne Williamson tells this beautiful story about Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci paints this picture of Jesus, and 10 years later, he wants to paint this picture of Lucifer, the devil. So he's walking around Venice. He's looking for his model. Who's going to be his devil? He's looking, and he sees his devil. And he walks up to him, and he says, I want to paint your picture. Do you know what the guy says to him? Don't you recognize me? You painted me 10 years ago. I was your Jesus. Our deepest scars are our greatest strengths. Our deepest scars are our greatest strengths. Now, one of the strengths that we need to do, and we need to flex every time, is when we see these triangles, is to remind ourselves that what we're seeing is an illusion. As Abel said, we all have fears. And a lot of us create our own illusions, create our own blind spots. And what I'd like to do now is offer some solutions of how you can work with your blind spots. I think one of the biggest fairy tales out there that we tell ourselves is I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect. Because if I'm perfect, then there's no way you can't love me. There's no way you can't love me if I'm perfect. What we have to remember, though, do you know what's encoded in our DNA? Evolution. So let's borrow a little slogan we use in recovery. Progression, not perfection. There's no such thing as the perfect plan. I think a lot of us have this idea that this perfect plan is going to shelter us and exonerate us from any further adversity or fears. Tomorrow is one of my favorite days of the week. Tomorrow is Monday. This magical day of transformation. Somehow Mondays become this powerful day where we can implement all these changes we want in our life. Just a quick question. Who started a new diet on Monday? Put up your hand. Has anybody ever started a new diet on Monday? Put up your hand. Who started a new exercise program on Monday? Put up your hand. There it is. There it is. Who stopped smoking on Monday? Who's going to start drinking the green juices on Monday? Who's going to start limiting gluten, watching sugar on Monday? Who's going to stop doing cocaine on Monday? Put up their hand. Sometimes I can't resist. Okay? Sometimes I can't resist. The monkey might be off my back, but that circus is always in town. What's the difference between Sunday and Monday? Seriously, what's the difference? 60 seconds separates the old me and the new me. 60 seconds separates what's left standing here and this massive amount of transformation over here. 60 seconds. Do you know where that 60 seconds gets its power? Where do you think that 60 seconds gets its power from? It sure as heck ain't the calendar's permission. That power comes from you. So whenever I'm talking with people and we're looking to implement change, I really encourage people to start on Sunday. Let's start on Sunday. The other fairy tale that we like to tell ourselves is that other people need to validate us. How many times have you stopped yourself dead in your tracks because you're worried about what other people are going to think? How many times have you thought twice about exposing that vulnerability, about putting yourself out there, about pushing send on your blog post because you're worried about how other people are going to think? We don't need other people to validate us. But yet, a lot of us are using other people for validation. A lot of us are so wrapped up in what other people think that we'll keep on saying no to ourselves and yes to other people. Do you know what one of the most powerful words in the English language is? We practiced it as kids growing up, saying our ABCs. L-M-N-O, N-O, N-O, N-O. No. How many of us have said yes to another person, but no to ourselves? We can only give to other people what's inside of us to give. So a lot of people ask me, they say, Darren, you know, that sounds very, very, very self-centered. And you know what? You're damn right I'm self-centered. Would you prefer I was you-centered? Abel did a great job of building some excitement into the fears. And she hit the nail right on the head. We are never, ever, ever going to get rid of our fears. This happy ever after, it's a fairy tale. We are always going to have our fears. Now, what do we do with them? What do we do with these fears? What do we do with fear? Do we let it make decisions for us? Well, for a lot of us, they are making decisions for us. For a lot of us, they're holding us back. You know, I convinced myself many, many, many years ago, this is 2008 when I moved from Canada to Asia, that I was, you know, taking a big, bold adventure out into the unknown and trusting myself. The reality is, I was moving to a very, very, very safe and secure contract on the other side of the world. It's these fears that'll hold us back. One of the most compassionate things we can do for ourselves is learn how to walk with our fears. And one of the first steps that we have to do with that is, number one, we need to admit that we're afraid. So number one, we need to admit we're afraid. What are you afraid of? Abel, what are you afraid of?
Not being perfect.
Not being perfect. Not being liked. You know, underlying the majority of fears is the grim reaper itself, that I am unlovable, that nobody's going to love me, that I'm not enough. So the first thing that we do when we're dealing with fears is we admit our fear. When I got into recovery, the first thing I had to do is I had to admit that I was powerless over alcohol, that I was powerless over drugs. Number one, admit. Number two, and this is the biggest mistake that we make, we run from our fears, don't we? We run as fast as we can from our fears, don't we? We run as fast as we can from our fears. It's so counterintuitive to sit and to allow those feelings to come up. And especially as men. Whoa. As men out there, don't even get me started on talking about feelings. Number two, sit with those feelings. Don't squirm away from them. Don't reach for your usual distractions. Don't reach for your phone. Don't see what's on the TV. Stop using judgment to play hide and seek with what you're really feeling. Stop using other people to be a barrier for what you don't want to feel. Feel your fears. Allow those feelings to come up. You're sending a very, very empowering message to yourself. Number one, I can handle these. I might not like them, but I can handle them. Number two is you're nurturing yourself through these feelings. You're not running and playing hide and seek from them. You're allowing them to come up. Number three, be fearless. Fearless is not the absence of fear. Fearless is I have so much more courage, honesty, and humility to walk with my fears. We're never going to be rid of our fears. But what we can learn how to do is walk with them. Where'd the time go? Before I go, okay, I want to leave you with one more story. And this story is going to come down to your choice. It's always your choice, your responsibility. And the story is one of my favorite stories growing up in Canada. It's the story of two wolves. There's a Ojibwe grandfather and his grandson, and they're sitting around a campfire. And the grandfather says to the grandson, there's a war going on in your mind. And the war is between anger, resentment, jealousy, judgment, and fear. That's one wolf. The other wolf is love, compassion, humility, honesty, and courage. The young grandson looks at his grandfather and he says, Grandfather, which one wins? And the grandfather looks at him and says, depends which one you feed. Take a look outside at the reflections. What do you see? Thanks. Yeah.